The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to CPIC's webinar on math tonight. We are just going to wait about 2 minutes for everybody to have a chance to log in. So thank you very much, and we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to CPIC's webinar, How Can I Help? A Parent's Guide to Helping Your Child with Math. My name is Josh Davstein. I'm the current CPIC chair, and with me online are Lisa Coster, former chair of CPIC, Renata Lusetto, Rosemary Stagg, and Barb Belanger. We are very glad that you are with us tonight. Just a few things for the presentation tonight. The webinar is being recorded and will be available online on YouTube at the Halton CPIC page. Also, that we will take questions during the presentation. You can ask the questions in the Questions tab, which is on the webinar screen tab on the right-hand side. When you ask the questions, any of technical nature, we will answer them during the presentation. Any questions directed to the presenter, we will take a selection of the questions at the end tonight to answer. If your question isn't answered, you can email CPIC and we will forward them to Angelina. Angelina Barden has been a teacher with the Halton Catholic School Board for 13 years. She has taught in both panels, but had the pleasure of teaching grade 8 for the last 5 years. Her love of math and new learning brought her into the curriculum this year. Most importantly, though, she is a mother of 4 kids. Her children range in age from 18 to 8, and she has experienced the at-home struggle of supporting her own children through the trials and tribulations at math. At present, she is the curriculum consultant and math K-12 contact for the board. So without much further ado, Angelina, you can start your presentation.
Thank you, Josh, and welcome everybody. This is going to be a very different forum for me to be working with tonight, but I'm thankful for this opportunity, especially on a snowy day like today, that we have the opportunity of using a webinar instead of having to have gone out in the snow for this meeting. We will begin with what I thought might sum up a lot of feelings for most parents when they see their children coming home with math homework. I know myself, I have been told by my own children that I don't understand the math that they're doing, or I don't understand the way that they're learning it, and I can't help them. I think that the point of tonight's session is to give parents some tools, some resources, some comfort level to let them start having those conversations about math at home. Math seems like a very complicated process for most people, but it really is just some simple steps that really help create positive learning environments at home and at school, and those are going to help us really create innovative and creative learners that are independent, which is what we're looking for most. Lisa, if you have this opportunity now to maybe we can look at some of those poll questions. I'll put up all of them. I know Lisa is going to give some feedback out there on the first few so that we can see what people's own feelings have been about math in their past. Are we able to get some polling, Lisa? Is that, it's hard for me to see that happening.
Unmuted.
Sorry about that. I was trying to find my unmute button.
No worries.
Okay, so the first one came through. You can see the results. I will put up the second one. Do you want?
Now
It's amazing.
Sure, I can see I can't see the results.
Oh, they're not on your screen?
They're not showing up.
Okay, so we had 48% of them, respondents felt that it was their favorite subject. 40% it said that it was okay, and the remaining 12% dreaded it. Okay,
right.
so this is for the first
elementary.
one. Elementary.
Right.
So let's see what they say for secondary.
Secondary, yeah.
So we'll just wait.
I have a feeling our numbers might drop a little bit.
Yeah, so far they have. Well, still pretty good. It's kind of, the nice thing is that 67% of them voted. So give it a couple more minutes, and then another minute, and well, that's too bad you can't see it on your screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure why that is.
I believe everybody else can, though. Josh, maybe you can kick in and tell us if you could see it. Give it another second. They're still voting. Okay, I think we're just about done. Okay. So we'll share that. And so we still have 40% of them felt that it was one of their favorite subjects. 33% felt it was okay, and 27% dreaded it.
So we have a bit of an increase.
Yeah.
So maybe while people are thinking about the other questions there, we can address some of these ideas that more people enjoy math in elementary school. There seems to be a little bit more flexibility when kids were younger, or when you were remembering back to your days in elementary school when there wasn't maybe quite as much pressure on math. Secondary, we started to feel the pressures. We started to, if we're really old, we remember those days of when we were doing a general and academic and classes and what you fell into and where you should be going. So I think that it's important for us to start to examine our own feelings about math before we really realize what's happening with our own children, because lots of times we inadvertently pass on some of our ill feelings of math at home when we discuss things about what we didn't like about it or what we had trouble in. And kids pick up on those things really fast from us. I don't know, Lisa, we can do just the third one. Some people are born with the ability to do math, because I'd be really interested in what people have to say about that before we move on to the next.
Okay, I've launched it, so I'll wait for the responses.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
Mm-hmm.
And Angelina, just as a aside, everybody can see it except you because you're watching your presentation, your PowerPoint presentation live. You're not watching it through the system.
Right. So that would explain why. Excellent.
Almost there.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm used to being muted. All right. I think everybody who's still a couple more coming in. All right. So we have 61% of the people agree with that statement. 16 strongly agree. So 77% in total agree or strongly agree.
Right.
7% don't know, and the other 16% either disagree or strongly disagree.
Okay. Okay. I think that that's an interesting question, because I think innately we all are born with the ability to do math. I think we start to lose that, and as we get older, people start to think that only certain people are born with that ability. As a teacher, I know that I heard that many, many times from parents coming in and explaining to me that they weren't very good in math, and so they assumed their children were not going to be very good in math. Or they would say the opposite, well, I have the math gene, so my child will have the math gene. And I think that that does a disservice to some of the fundamental things that we need to learn about math, which is, first of all, that everybody has that ability and everybody can excel in it. So I'm going to move on. We may come back and look at some of these ideas later. I might ask to put up a few more of these cool questions, but I'm going to move on to this idea of a growth mindset. And this is something that we seem to be, it's kind of a new educational jargon that's come out, but it's a really powerful jargon and one that I think a lot of people need to embrace. And I know for myself at home, it's kind of changed my own parenting practices of how I speak to my children. So I want to take a little look at these questions first. What is a growth mindset? How will it affect my child learning math? And what can I do at home to promote this growth mindset? So I'll tell you first that a growth mindset is the belief that a person has that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work. The idea that talent without hard work and dedication will get you nowhere. Sometimes we refer to this, there's lots of articles that talk about the 10,000 hours that athletes need to really hone in on their abilities. And we think sometimes that people have natural born abilities, natural talents, but those talents really can't do anything if you're not planning on putting in the work and the dedication to really improve on those and have them experience the amount of growth. You know, my go-to example is always going to be LeBron James right now, arguably the best basketball player in the world, but someone who still practices 5 or 6 hours every single day. So not a person who's afraid of a challenge or who says, well, I'm really good at this, so I don't need to do any work at it anymore. And I think that that's the key to understanding a growth mindset. How this affects my child learning math is that sometimes we have a fixed mindset, this idea that people's abilities are fixed, and we excuse people from being successful in certain things. And I think that the biggest problem we have is that we excuse people from being successful in math. And math is really fundamental to success in life. We need to lose the notion that some people are math people and some people are English people and some people are artists. I think we need to see that all of these things are fundamentally tied together, and that it's just a matter of how much dedication and hard work you'd like to put into those things. We need people in our society to be numerate, much the same way we need people to be literate. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to be a mathematician or an engineer, but we need people to have very good number sense. And we need people to understand that they have that ability to excel. We need to put work into it. We need to examine the process of math, not the product, not the performance of math, but all the components that go into it ahead of time, kind of the ingredients that we use to make it what it is. And if we only emphasize that kind of end result, did you get the right answer, we lose out on a lot of really important key learning. And so that's what we're going to talk about now is what can we do at home to promote this mindset, and what can we do just to kind of tweak how we speak to our children or how we speak to each other so that we start to understand that. The leader in thought on mindset is a woman named Carol Dweck. She's written a number of books. One of them is here, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. She's a professor at Stanford, and she's done a significant amount of research into this idea of people with fixed mindsets and growth mindsets. And I've picked two quotes to use from her that I'd like to pick apart a little. So the first was this, so what should we say when children complete a task, say a math problem quickly and perfectly? Should we deny them the praise that they have earned? And her answer to that is yes. When this happens, I say, whoops, I guess that was too easy. I apologize for wasting your time. Let's do something you can really learn from. She's done a number of studies in which she took young children and had them working on puzzles. And when the children completed the puzzles, some of them, she said to them, wow, you're very smart. You did a wonderful job. And other students, instead of giving the praise about them being smart, she said, wow, you worked really hard on that. And then after, she went back to them and presented them with puzzles that were more challenging, and the students who were told they had worked really hard were up for the challenge. They wanted to move on. They wanted to try something a little bit more meaty. And the students who had been told, wow, you must be really smart, were afraid to move on to something more challenging, because now it made them need to consider what a person's thought were going to be about them afterwards. What if they didn't complete the puzzle properly, the more challenging one? It would leave them, feeling vulnerable and feeling that perhaps they weren't smart. And we don't want that to happen. We don't like that feeling for ourselves. So she's very quick to point out this idea that when students do something very easily, when something comes innately to them, that we should be looking, instead of praising them, we should be looking at them and saying, wow, this really wasn't a challenge for you. Let's find something that really is going to challenge you, something you're really going to learn from. I think that's a really powerful thing for us to be able to do at home, is for us to look for those opportunities with our children when they do something easy and say, look it, you could be doing something so much more challenging. And I'm going to move on to the next slide, because this one might cause a little division amongst people, because it is aimed by Carol Dweck right at parents. This idea that parents think they can hand children permanent confidence, like a gift, by praising their brains and talent. It doesn't work. And in fact has the opposite effect. It makes children doubt themselves as soon as anything is hard or anything goes wrong. If parents want to give their children a gift, the best thing they can do is teach their children to love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy effort, and keep on learning. That way their children don't have to be slaves of praise. They will have a lifelong way to build and repair their own confidence. And I think that as a society, we really need to start focusing on this idea, because our children are going to grow up and they are going to face adversity, and they're going to have to face difficult moments and challenges. And if we have given them those tools by teaching them that they have the power to work through things, that they have the ability to always be learning and to always be growing, then we are giving them those tools that they need to be facing these adverse moments in their life. It is a fascinating read. If you are up for the challenge, Carol Dweck has done some wonderful work and will give you some wonderful insight. And I think that this brings us to some very specific things that we can be doing at home. The first idea is that if we looked at fixed mindsets, the things that we say, and I think if we take a moment and we reflect, we can think about the times that we've done this in our own parenting, in our own interactions, that in a fixed mindset, we praise quickly for being smart. We were having a discussion today about this idea of how often we say it to our own children when they're little. Oh, you are so clever, you are so smart. And not giving them any kind of genuine feedback about why they are or what they've done that is giving you that impression that they are smart. That in a fixed mindset, we praise for achievements that come easily. We praise the person who can score 10 goals instead of all the people that helped, facilitate those goals happening. We emphasize the actual achievement at the end instead of the process that went with it. And that we focus on grades and levels far too often. And I think that translates very quickly to our children who want to know a grade on something immediately. And grades, research has shown over and over that grades are very limiting for students. They don't learn anything from a grade. They learn when we give them feedback. They learn when we can give them specific points of things that they had done well and things that they have that they still need to work on. But grades are something that we look at and then we toss away. And so I think that we need to start focusing on the process that went into that. So it's not that if a student gets 100% that we would say, oh, okay, thanks, and walk away from it. But we look at all the hard work that had to go in to doing this, to getting that 100%, if it took that hard work. And we look at all the actual process of what they did to do it, and we go through those components with them. And then we can say, wow, all this hard work gave you this. Isn't that awesome? So we can look at these growth mindset ideas, and that's kind of what I was just saying, that we praise effort and strategies. So instead of looking at just an answer, especially in math, we look at the thoughtful way that they have done things. We talk about why they got an answer that they did, how they solved it, what they were thinking, kind of praise that ingenuity on those things. In a growth mindset, we comment on the emphasis as on application and effort, not that final result. And we work really hard at building their self-confidence, but not falsely. So we're not praising and building confidence that is built on kind of that idea of a house of cards, that it really doesn't have anything to substantiate it. We build their self-confidence by really getting them to understand that hard work and dedication is an awesome thing, and it will pay off. It sometimes takes a while to see that, but it is eventually going to give you that payout that you are looking for. We provide constructive criticism. No one can do well just on praise alone. We need to know the things that we still need to work on. None of us are perfect. I especially can attest to that. And we have to take those moments to be able to receive feedback, and we have to learn how to give good feedback as well as parents and from our children, to realize that there's always moments of growth, that nobody is done growing, nobody is done learning. And so when we've done something well, we say, great, now here are the next steps to doing it, and placing real importance on that learning process instead of on that grading process. So, having your child come home, and I've had this experience of having my child come home, and saying to me, look, I got an A. And I said, what does an A mean? And they had no idea what it meant. So we went instead and looked and said, okay, well, tell me all the things you did well on here. Show me why you think that this is something awesome. And it was amazing when they could pick those out. And now I had something tangible to say, yes, you did. You did really, you've learned so much from this. That's fantastic. Instead of only focusing on what that A meant, because, you know, to an 8-year-old, an A didn't really mean anything at all. Okay, so I think that that's an important component. And then this kind of last component is a really strong one. It's called the power of yet. I can't do this yet, but I will do it soon. And I think that whenever it's hard, and I know that when you are at home and your children are upset by something, especially when it comes to homework, we want to console them. And sometimes we console them by saying, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's not a problem, you don't have to, you don't have to do it, it's not a big deal. But I think that we need to give them this really powerful statement of yet. You can't do it, but you can't do it yet. You will be able to. Let's keep trying. Let's keep working through this. And I had someone tell a story today about an author that they know who, you know, it took 13 tries before someone decided that they were going to publish her book. And if she had given up, you know, on the first time or the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth, etc., she would never, none of us would have had the experience of reading her books, and they've been wonderful. So I think that it's important that, you know, we realize that there's always a yet, that I might not have it this moment, but I will get it because I'm going to keep trying. And I think that we need to focus on that. Now, I know that people have tuned in because they wanted some real tangible things that they might be able to introduce at home. And I know that there have been previous webinars that have talked about this power of mindsets and growth. And so I don't want to linger on this anymore. I would like to kind of move into some practical applications for what you can do to help your children succeed in math class with practical tips instead of continuously just, it's great to give them the idea that you can't do this yet, and praising them for their effort, but now how can you actually help them to face up to those challenges? What can you do to get them through those kinds of things? And so, moving on to that idea, I've found another little cartoon that I think sums things up very good for us, which is Houston, we have a word problem, because nothing seems to invoke fear faster than word problems when students bring those home. So we will come into the idea of what does a math program look like in Ontario and how can you support it at home. And so I'd like to, go right into kind of the curriculum document, that the idea of a balanced math program in Ontario. Ontario mathematics curriculum is based on the belief that students learn mathematics most effectively when they're given opportunities to investigate ideas and concepts through problem solving. They are carefully guided into understanding mathematic principles involved. At the same time, it promotes a balanced program in mathematics. So I think we need to look that balanced truly is balanced, that there are wonderful instructional approaches happening by teachers. Students are given problem-solving models to work with. They're given time for purposeful practice. We also give time for basic facts and operational skills, explicit teaching of those kinds of things, and then thoughtful use of resources. So I think that the most important component, though, the kind of key that we can transfer at home and that really supports a truly balanced approach and truly helps our students is understanding the language of math at home and using the 4-part problem-solving model. Now, you might not completely understand what the 4-part problem-solving model is, and so I think that this will be, I will give you a breakdown into all 4 steps and how you can use these. The most important component of this is that all of our students are using this component. You can walk into almost any classroom in a Halton Catholic school, and you would be able to ask students, how do I solve problems? And they will be able to give you this, well, we do it in 4 parts, and these are the parts we do. So if you at home are aware of that, and your student or your child is struggling, this gives you an opportunity to be continuing that same language and to help them activate some prior knowledge, to activate their thinking that they're doing right now, and get them ready to start to reason out answers. So knowing the steps of the problem-solving model will give you that direct link and help support your child into greater independence, which is ultimately what our goal is going to be. Okay? So the very first part, as you can see, is that we think. We need to think through a problem. And children, you know, brains make really interesting connections, and that sometimes we pick out only the words we want to when we're reading it quickly. The most common mistake that happens in math is reading, is that we just don't read the problem properly, or we don't read the question properly. So by taking some time to slow down and think about the problem, we are giving our brain that opportunity to adjust. And even more powerful is having your child read you the problem out loud. It allows for you to maybe see if there's any misconceptions in what they're reading, just in wording alone, but it also allows you to hear what they're emphasizing and what they're not. My next suggestion would be you read the question back to them if they're really struggling with it. So you read it to them and see what they get out of that. I know in a classroom, my most effective teaching method when students say I don't understand is the first thing I do is read the question to them. And most of the time they go, oh, now I get it. And you might see that really fast at home, is that it just took a different voice to be able to hear that. The next point is to have them summarize what the problem is asking. If they can pick out those key things, that key information, or explain what the problem is, then you can see what they know and what you might need to ask a few more questions about. And math is really, from a parental perspective, about you asking good questions, because you giving answers to them isn't going to help them know the material or really understand the concepts. But you asking really good questions, and sometimes that really good question is just the question, why do you think that? What makes you say that? Allows them to have to search their brains and start thinking it through. And if you remember that kids respond really well to why questions, because those are their favorite when they're little, is to ask you why. So you can have this opportunity to kind of turn it back on them and start asking them why they think that. When they're thinking, ask them to talk about the math language that they hear in the problem. So does the question say, the difference between two numbers is? Well, what does difference mean? See if they know. Let them tell you. Oh, difference. I think that means subtraction. Okay, well now we have something. Write down the word subtraction. Do we see any other operations that might be in here? Do we see things like the word product? Do we see the word more than, less than? Help them to pick out, highlight those key pieces of information. Next, you can say to them, do you think there's more than one step involved? Because that gets them to see that there might be more than one thing that they have to do. So maybe if I focus on this first, then I can move to the second portion. Once we have solid thinking happening, we can ask them, your child, are they ready to move on to the planning phase? Okay, and so planning means I've taken this thinking, I've broken apart the question, I know what kind of operations are going to be there, so now what can I do? What materials do I think I might need? What resources do I have that might help me solve this? Do I have a note that I've taken in class? Do I have a class portal that might have examples? Do I have examples in my textbook that I could go to and look? Do I need a calculator to answer this question? Is there a formula somewhere that I know that I have written down that I think might apply to this? So make a list. Make a list of the actions of what you think you're going to need to do. Look for patterns in numbers. Look for patterns in the type of questions you're using. Make the connections of what you've been doing already. And then maybe even try some educated guesses. Sometimes we call that guess and check. Sometimes we call it guesstimating. But, you know, throwing out some numbers that you think might work in it. And then what about a model or a representation? In my house, we use what we have at hand. I have lots of little boys in my house. We use Lego pieces for everything that we are going to model. So when we are adding and subtracting and I need manipulatives, I grab the Lego very fast. Use what you have at hand. Oftentimes, students just need a quick visualization for them to really get them started and get them on their way. Okay. Once we have got our plan in place, we carry out the plan that we have. I've broken down the steps, I've broken down the question, I've made a plan, let's give it a try. Am I having some difficulty? So if you still have a child sitting in front of you frustrated and having difficulty, say to them, okay, maybe we need to go back. Maybe we need to just look quickly again at our plan. Maybe we need to take a quick look at what we thought about it at first. Maybe we missed a step. But have them try to solve the problem. See if they can do it in more than one way. If they get an answer pretty quickly, have them try it in a different fashion. See what they can get from it. And then I think that takes us to really the most important concept. And this is the concept that, that we in schools are trying very hard to get children to understand. And this is that idea of looking back, checking to make sure that things make sense. And the more that, that children start to hear this idea, look back, at home, at school, it really allows them to start to test out reasonableness of answers. I was in a classroom recently, and someone had the number 2 over 4, and they said it equals 1. And the teacher said to them, 2 divided by 4, how can that equal 1? And he said, well, my calculator says it. And she said, but does that make sense? Does that sound reasonable to you? And he said, well, no, it doesn't make any sense. And she said, well, maybe your calculator needs to be reset, because calculator is a tool. We need to really rely on that exceptional thing that we have, which is our brain. So asking your children, go back, look at it. Is my reasonable answer? Is my answer reasonable? Does it look like I've got the right pieces in place? If your answer doesn't make sense, and they can't really explain it to you yet of why it doesn't make sense, that's okay. Because now, when they go back to school, they have a blueprint in front of them that they can show to a teacher who can very quickly pinpoint where a misconception might have happened, where something needs to be tweaked. It's almost impossible when a student comes back in and says, I don't understand, and they show you blankness, because we don't know, what don't you understand? But if we see this process, this wonderful amount of thinking being done and trying and work done, it usually means that there's just something small that we need to take a look at. And I think that this is fundamental for us to be enforcing at home and fundamental for us to be enforcing at school, because these mistakes actually are really important. And if we go back to that idea of growth mindsets, the idea that mistakes actually compound our learning, that when we make a mistake we learn twice, because we have a brain synapse that fires the first time the mistake happens, and then as it gets corrected and we really understand the misconception, it fires again for us, and we actually experience a greater amount of growth. Now, if a student gets it right in the look-back phase, look at that, wonderful. Look at all the hard work you put into this. And eventually, as our students become older and as they move into secondary school, obviously they may not be looking at each individual phase by writing them down. But this idea has been reinforced since they have been in their primary years, and it becomes an innate thing for them. That when I go to a problem, when I'm starting to experience, my first steps are going to be, first I'm going to think, then I'm going to plan out what I do, then I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do a look back to make sure it's done and that it's done reasonably. And I think that this is one of the most important things that we can be giving our children at home in helping them with their homework. And I'd like to point out that none of it actually involved you having to do any math, because I have, previously sat through watching YouTube videos and trying to figure out the math myself so that I might be able to help my child. And it hasn't helped any of us in our whole conception. So I think that that this would be a much more powerful tool for us to transfer that thinking back into their hands, but to show them that you're there and you're supporting them and you're giving them what they need. Okay. Now, oops, sorry, we've gone a little bit ahead, but next, the last kind of component of what you can be doing at home are these kinds of digital resources. I've got a few listed that we're going to go through. They are resources that we as a board support. I understand that there are a multitude of resources out there that you can find online. There are games, there are apps on your iPads, there are math programs, there are lots of things that are fun and interactive. And I think anything that you find and that you find are working for you and your children at home that makes math fun and interesting and challenging for them is a wonderful thing. But if you are looking for some resources that will actually help a student who is struggling, a student who might be experiencing some learning gaps, who might be missing some of those kind of key building components, building blocks of their learning, then I think that we have some very specific resources that we can go to. And that first one is Success Maker. Now we as a board are implementing it out there for our struggling learners in grades 2 to 6 is kind of our target audience for that. And Success Maker is an online program that you sign up for, and it takes your children through a diagnostic that accurately assesses where their learning strengths are, but most importantly, where some weaknesses might be. And then it goes about setting up a program that will take them through cycles of learning in order to help build where those gaps happen to be. And it does align with our provincial curriculum. It is a great program to use. It is not probably going to be as fun for your kids who are excelling in math and are looking for wizards and fun things like that. But it is fun and interactive for students who might be a little bit weary of wanting to do more math homework, but who you know need a little bit of extra time on it. And it is proven to take students up to the levels that they need to be. Okay. Next is the EduGains site. EduGains is a ministry website. It's put out by the Ministry of Education, and its educational resources can be accessed by anyone. So what I've gone into and shown you on the screen is where you would go. So you go to edugains.ca. If you go into the tab that says Ministry Developed Resources and you click on the Mathematics button, it will take you to all of their resources that are housed. Videos, PDFs, articles, monographs, things like that you might want to access from home. And it is all directly tied into the Ontario curriculum. So I've highlighted a couple of sites that you might want to go onto. These sites now are aimed more for our learners in grades 7 to 10. Success Maker is for our younger students, primary into junior. And then EduGains has a lot of materials for our grade 7 to 10 students who really need these kind of interactive ways to develop their math sense a little bit more. The first one is Clips that you can see there, Student Clips. It's an interactive math coaching site that allows students to practice lessons they're learning in their grade 7 to 10 classrooms. The site has an interactive whiteboard that allows students to experiment with fractions, integers, graphing, patterning, algebra. It has things like interactive fractions to find equivalent fractions, number lines for integers, algebra tiles. It allows students to play with things like the Pythagorean theorem. So it really supports the kinds of learning that they're doing in school, but it gives them a digital manipulative, I think would be the best way to put it, so that they are actually able to tangibly see the things that they are working on. It also gives you access to the gap closing materials, which helps support students in their EQAO grades of grades 6 to 9. Grade 6 and 9. So if you were to go into student clips, you would be able to find gap closing materials, and in grade 6 it will cover information from grade 4, 5, and 6. And in our grade 9 gap closing, it will cover grades 7, 8, and 9. And it's a resource that if you find that you're in an EQAO year, this year if you have a student who's in grade 9 that's struggling a little bit and they have EQAO coming up, or you have a student in grade 6 at home, then they could access these, you could be accessing these kinds of materials to work with them at home just to help them feel a little more prepared, I think would be the best way to go. The resources are meant to help close gaps and look for areas that they still struggle in. Mathies is another site which houses everything listed above, but has some additional supports like games and digital learning tools that some students really find kind of fun and interactive. And it's nice that they can actually be using these things in school, and lots of times you would find in an intermediate classroom or in a grade 9 and 10 classroom that the teachers are using student clips on their smart boards, etc. And so it's nice that they could go home and they could be interacting with those very same materials. Now, if you're looking for very specific help, you can, and you have a student in your house who is in grade 7 to 10, they can sign up for homework help. And in fact, most grade 7 and 8 students have been signed up in their own classrooms. You can talk to their teachers if they have never told you that they were given a password. But Homework Help is an online tutorial for our students that we subscribe to. It has Ontario certified teachers who are tutors on the site, and you can see that it tells you the times for tutoring. So most of the time it's from 5:30 to 9:30, and those kind of peak tutoring times. You'll see that they don't do it on Fridays and Saturdays. We feel that most people aren't doing homework on those nights. You can also see your tutor schedule, so if your child ends up liking one specific tutor, they can see when they are on. But even better than that is that if the tutors aren't available, there are resources that have been logged on there, like video clips of specific assignments and things like that, that they could be using and lockers where they could be doing work and problems, and housing them in their own locker to pull back out for a tutor. But it's a great way that if they're struggling with a specific concept and they're frustrated by it and they don't want to wait till the next day to be with their own teacher and you don't really know how to help them, Homework Help is an awesome way for them to go on and get a live voice to talk them through and to give them multiple representations of doing a question. And so it's very, very helpful, and one of those things that, that I think is fantastic for our older learners. So I'm kind of moving to the wrap-up phase here so that we'll have some time for a few questions. So kind of my last thought came from Jo Bowler, and she is a studier of Carol Dweck, who we talked about earlier for growth mindsets. Jo Bowler is a professor at Stanford University as well, and she has taken this idea of growth mindsets and applied it strictly to the idea of mathematics and the idea that everybody can excel. We can always be learning. Our brain is always working. It is always growing as long as we are challenging it. And she says mathematical discussions are an excellent resource for student understanding. And so I want to leave that as being the most important resource that you can have at home for your child is you. That you talking to your children, you having discussions, you discussing math with them in an open and creative way, in a way that brings about real-world connections to them, is probably the most imperative component to the idea of how you can help your child succeed in math. Having your kids participate in activities like estimating the price of groceries when they're shopping with you, setting their own budget, allowing them to go to the store with them and you giving them some money and them having to work out how much something's going to cost, how much tax would be involved as children get older and they start to need to have those. Having those discussions with them is powerful and teaches them that math isn't always about sitting with a piece of paper, and that the most important math we can do is those mental exercises in our brains where we get really good at estimating and things like that. Playing cards with your children, having kids determine probability of when the next ace might come out can help them. Discussing sports averages. So if they win another game, what would this bring their overall average up to, or what are they averaging per game? You can get a lot of data management questions into one hockey or a basketball game in an evening. As your kids get older, talking to them about real things like the economy, prices for things. It's most of us have probably been sitting around at home working out how much money we're saving on gas right now because the prices keep going down. Well, those are things that could be of interest to our kids, especially some of our high school kids as they get a little bit older and closer to driving age. But someone told me yesterday, wow, I'm saving $12 a week in gas. Well, how'd you figure that out? Let's talk a little bit about that and how, how many liters does my car fit, does my gas tank take? And then if I'm saving 3 cents a liter on each gas, what am I saving? It's amazing how those real world connections can start to play out. And we do these things every day when we talk about reading with our children because we innately read with them. We read stories, we read newspapers, we watch the news, we talk about those kinds of things, we talk about current events lots of times with them, but we don't always include math in those things. So I think that really just opening that up and having those conversations can take a lot of fear away from both sides of everything, so from parents and from children, about what math is all about. And then I've kind of left it on a little funny note that I'll give people a moment, because kids always ask this question, how am I ever going to use this? Well, they do a lot of things that don't necessarily translate into their everyday life, but we still have to do them. And I think that the more that we can enjoy math, the more that we can understand that math is about creativity, not formula, that math and art and music are tied together, and we stop seeing things in isolation. I think that can be the most powerful tool of how we can help our children. And so I think that brings us to questions. Josh, Barb?
Barb, you're online. Okay, come on. Barb?
Hello.
There you are. Okay, good. Did you want to ask the questions, Barb? Is she there?
Maybe no one had any questions.
Oh, no, we have a number of them. There's a lot of them. Okay,
no.
Well, one I thought was really good, especially because it wasn't addressed, was, is there any online help for grade 11 and 12 students?
Well, I'm going to be honest. Grade 11 and 12, depending on what they're taking, we would have no specific information that I could give at this point in time. Normally their best resource is going to be their own classroom teacher, especially for those classes, the U classes, where they start to get very specific. Those teachers are often, most of our secondary schools do offer some extra math help during periods at lunchtime or after school. And the teachers themselves will usually provide any electronic resources that are available. I know lots are even creating their own webinars of lessons, etc., that students can access to help them. So those would be my real go-to for those 11 and 12 students who are experiencing difficulties.
It's Renata. I just wanted to ask, one of the questions that's come through are there any apps that you can suggest for people to use?
I'm going to be honest and say that I'm not going to endorse any specific apps. Anything that you explore and you find useful and your children enjoy using, then I can't see that there's any harm in them. But I think that there are probably, thousands that you could log onto and start using. I know that some of our schools are using Gizmo apps, which are tools that they can use in the upper grades. It's just an app on your iPads of different manipulatives and mathematical tools. But otherwise, I don't really have any specific suggestions for apps.
Okay.
I wish I could say yes, but I'd have to go with what the board is. What we access ourselves, and so I've given what those resources that we've vetted and used and that I could say have a tried and true record to them.
Yeah, yeah. There are lots of questions coming through, so I apologize that we probably won't get to them all. But one question we have there: when a child is working on a problem, is it more effective to continually correct writing errors while they work out the questions, or let them finish and then correct the typography afterwards or other errors?
I think it's more effective to let them continue unless you notice that the error is something significant that could affect the overall outcome. But if we're talking things like spelling mistakes or placement errors, then I think that it's more important to let them continue working through and let that thinking process go, and then say to them at the end, okay, so what'd you notice about this? Because those are things that you can probably easily correct as you get to the end. But if you did notice something significant, like they had told you originally that they were going to be doing division in the problem and now they've changed it to subtraction, you might want to say to them, I thought you told me that you were going to use division, so what are you using now? And just see if they can make that connection kind of on their own.
Great, thanks. Another question, we actually had some questions even prior to the webinar come through, so I was wondering how math questions on a test are categorized into thinking, application, or communication marks. Sometimes it looks like the questions are almost identical. Are they just marked with a different viewpoint?
It's going to depend on the questions. Lots of times teachers are drawing from resources, like resource banks, that actually have already put those categories in place for them. So when we look at thinking problems, it's difficult always for us to assess thinking problems on a test because it's looking at all the things that a student had to think about in order to do it, all those messy parts, all the trial and error parts. Application, though, is very easily accessible for a teacher to point out. It's that they take a concept that has been taught or has been learned, but we're asking the student to apply it into a new scenario. And then our communication is our idea of how that student can explain what they were thinking and how they arrived at an answer or why they arrived at the answer that they did. So that's where those categories come from. The categories are very clearly explained. If you want to go into, you can access them on the Ministry of Ontario curriculum site under mathematics for K-8. The categories are explained. They're explained again in our secondary panel curriculums as well, or in the Growing Success document. All of those are on the ministry site. You can even access them through EduGains, the site that we showed earlier, and they'll explain each of the categories and how they are broken down.
Okay, great, thank you. A question I think a lot of people have noticed comes through. Why is there no emphasis teaching the multiplication tables? Like we noticed there are grade 7s and 8s that cannot do the tables without a calculator.
Okay, so that's a really contentious issue. I think that there are a couple of things that we need to look at. Multiplication is introduced to students in grade 4. Now, the idea of multiplication, the idea that something is growing, is what conceptually we want students to understand when we're looking at multiplication. And the memorization of facts has been, for lots of people, something that they've moved away from, simply because we have a tool that does that for you, and that the emphasis should be on the idea of whether we can understand things like estimating and place value in multiplication so that I can decide if an answer sounds reasonable or not. So it's not that we don't want students to know their multiplication facts, it's where we have to put the emphasis on. Do we want them memorizing? Because what we learn from research is that when students memorize, they will memorize and forget. So they will memorize for the time being and do what they need to, much the same way if you are given a test on a specific, say, set of dates in history or something like that, that you will memorize those things because you know you are being tested for those things. And so lots of students in grade 4 have memorized their multiplication tables. But then as calculators get used and it doesn't become something that they need, by grade 7 and 8 they tell you, I've never learned my multiplication tables, I don't know them. Now, from a parent point of view, you're always free to have your kids learn multiplication tables at home too. My children have the unfortunate, maybe for them, time in between their summers of grade 3 and 4 in which we work on multiplication tables over the summer, just to kind of get the basic facts down. But I think that for lots of people, it's so much more important that they understand the idea that 12 times 12 is 144 only because I can see that if I multiply 12 times 10, I just have to add a 0 and I get 120. And then I multiply 2 times 12 and it's 24 and I add that and I get 144. That's a much greater understanding than the memorization of 12 times 12, because I don't really understand what that means. But when I break numbers apart and I see them as being elastic, for lack of a better word, that they stretch and they move and that they can be placed in new places, I get a better understanding of what place value means and the concept of what a growing pattern really is.
Right. Another question is, why does each teacher have a different way to teach math?
Well,
I think that's a tough one.
yeah, I don't know every teacher. I'd say that every single person has a different way that they teach something or that they do something. And so, our teachers aren't carbon copies of each other, and you have to remember that they're also going to bring their own experiences that they've had and how they have learned math to the table. Our teachers engage in lots of professional development. We all use the same curriculum. We're using the same resources in a classroom. So those things create a continuity in the fact that if I leave a grade 4 classroom in Burlington and I go to a grade 4 classroom in Toronto, I will be learning the same materials. There will be nothing different. Now, how that teacher introduces it and their comfort level and their experiences might have an effect on how that comes out, much the same way that two different salespeople selling, a product might approach that product, because they're each going to have their own perspective from it. So I think that we look at the fact that our foundations are all built on exactly the same components, in that we are drawing from the same curriculum, that we are drawing from the same mandate, that we're drawing from the same resources, that allows that continuity. But to take away the individuality of a teacher would be like mean you'd have a computer teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any information on how the growth mindset principles have worked out when applying them to children with ASD, so autism spectrum disorders, or and NOS, non-otherwise specified disorders?
I do not have anything specific on that. A person, if the person had that question and wanted to forward it to me, that I could look a little bit more into it and look at that resource within our special education resource team as well. I know that Joe Bowler, who's kind of powering the growth mindsets for math, has spoken to the fact that only students with very explicit learning disabilities do not benefit from a growth mindset. So I think that students with ASD absolutely would benefit from being praised for their effort, for their rise to challenges, for those kinds of things, and that it benefits everybody when we are looking at the process of what people are doing as opposed to only a product that are doing. So that when we're praising students for working to the best of their abilities, I think that that's what it would focus on. But I'm happy if an email wants to come and I can forward that to, or look into more specific research, because I don't really want to talk to something that I couldn't give very specifics on or say 100% certainty that this is what I felt.
Okay. And I think one last question for the night. There's questions about why the Halton Catholic School Board stopped using the jump math method, and why it does not have access to the Dreambox. To be honest with you, I don't know that program, but I gather the Halton School Board does use that program.
Okay, so two questions. The jump math isn't something that we don't use. We use it for very specific cases. Jump math is a very literal interpretation of math, and it is meant and used most often within our students with exceptionalities who might have difficulties with understanding conceptual understanding. So jump math is a step-by-step process to solving, for lack of a better word, more equations and things, not understanding word problems or picking out things like that. So jump math is not something that we don't use. It's just used sparingly, and it's used with a targeted audience, because for the majority of students, it would do them a disservice to be continually learning math in that fashion. Dreambox is another digital resource that is sold. Halton Public is using it selectively, so it is a misconception. I've spoken to Dreambox's rep. It's a misconception that all Halton Public students are using Dreambox. It was purchased specifically for their grade 4 students in a target ministry project, and then schools were given the option to purchase it. It's an expensive license. It costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $25 a student for a 1-year license, and it's, you know, it's been looked into. There's always possibilities that that resources come and go. We have to look at them very closely. We have to vet them. We have to really understand what their impact is going to be. Dreambox is a math digital program. It's a math game, and it doesn't replace what really should be our focus, which is fundamental, really good teaching and conceptual understanding with our students. So that's kind of my extent of Dreambox at this point in time, but I do like to point out that I have spoken to them, and specifically about Halton Public, because we had heard also that it is something that's being used by every student in Halton Public, and I was told that that is not the case. So we are giving SuccessMaker a try at this point, and aimed at those same target students to see how they do with it. Is that, are there any more
Excellent.
questions?
This is Josh. Angelina, this is
Yes.
Josh again. I want to thank you on behalf of everybody for doing this wonderful and great presentation. Thank you for your time this evening to put this together and to come online and share it with us. For everybody, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and then just type in Halton CPIC, you will see all our previous webinars. And in a few days, it will be online. And please keep in mind that we're a parent volunteer committee, and we try to do this outside of our regular jobs and commitments. So, you know, once that will be online, you can view it as well. Okay. Any questions that were not answered, we will forward them to Angelina, and if you, you know, she can get back to you, or she can add that to an email that we send out to everybody else. Okay. So again, to find the YouTube channel, all you have to do is go to youtube.com, type in Halton CPIC, and all the previous webinars will be displayed. So again, thank you very much, everybody. We will be back next year with more webinars. On behalf of all of us at CPIC, on behalf of Barb, Elisa, Renata, and Rosemary, I'd like to wish you and the rest of CPIC a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, and have a great evening. And we're done.
Okay.
Hold on, let me unmute everybody else. Who did I unmute? That Barb is back. Lisa, you muted yourself, okay?
I think you're still recording.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, hold on.
Who is still recording? Well, that must be Lisa.
How do you know?
Okay.